Okay. Watch the first 3 episodes of Rings of Power, and I think I understand. I think I understand what the issue is. People aren't used to high fantasy anymore. And what I mean by that is, like, let's take a show like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is not high fantasy. Game of Thrones is fantasy, but it's not high fantasy. And what I mean by it's not high fantasy, it's when you sit down and you watch a show like Game of Thrones, the information or the world building that occurs basically happens on screen. Like concepts of certain characters are like, oh, Aegon the Conqueror is was like 100, when you're watching House of Dragon, of course, is like 100 years ago, and this happened 200 years ago, and this house is connected to that house, and these people are connected to that people. It's contained fantasy. The issue with that, especially when you jump over to Rings of Power is high fantasy. Like, you're sitting down and you're like, at the dawn of time, there were the Valinor who descended from like fucking Mount Olympus. And then from the Valinor came like these people who started that lineage over there, who began that kingdom. But then 2,000 years after they started that kingdom collapsed. And then there's a being over here on this side that began the great harmony with a bunch of like other spirits and beings, and then he created the disharmony by turning around and striking at the mortal world, and as a result casting the Valinor out of like their world and into basically the mortal plane. And because of that, the Valinor went to war with this being, and then he was defeated and he was replaced by this guy. But while this is going on, you've got dragons, giant spiders, giant wolves, giant spirits, you've got Balrogs, mountain giants, like a bunch of stuff happening on the side. And then you throw in like dwarves and hobbits and orcs and all these other type of creatures. And then you have like the first great war. But then the first great war isn't actually the first great war, because there are 7 wars that essentially happen inside of the one great war. And then the one great war is just a prelude for like 3 other great wars that are going to be happening over like a 3,000 year. You see where I'm getting with this? Like, Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. There is depth here. There are bloodlines that connect to other people, that go down to other people, that fulfill a prophecy, that does a thing, that creates another thing that's related to this thing, that goes over there and is connected to that thing. High fantasy. Game of Thrones is just like 100 years ago, literally like my great grandfather conquered all of this. And here we are as I fuck it up. So I can understand why Rings of Power turns a lot of people off, because there's a lot of information to essentially absorb. And there are also a lot of characters and character arcs that are essentially happening throughout, let's say, the first 3 episodes. Because in the first 3 episodes, you're setting up Galadriel, sorry. I don't know why I said her name like that. You're setting up her arc. And there's this weird, which is gonna be a video in and of itself, but there's like this really weird, I don't know, campaign on Twitter where people are like, feminism. And I'm like, I don't think you guys understood like just how powerful her character was in the original trilogy. Like, even if you watch the movies and you sat down and you watched it, you would understand, but that's neither here nor there. But then it's also setting up, let's say, the kingdoms of the south, which is going to end up becoming Mordor later on down the line. Then on the opposite side, it's setting up essentially the elves and the dwarves setting up their own trap / doom, in the form of they're going to build this grand tower, and then the grand tower is essentially to forge the Rings of Power. And of course, as we know, going down the line, the Rings of Power are basically manipulations set up by Sauron to control all of the greatest and most powerful beings across all of Middle-earth and bring them over to his side. And of course, Galadriel is going to discover that deception and prevent it from happening. But while you're doing that, you have like the 2 tribes of men, then you have Numenor, and then you have this going on there and that going on there. There's a lot to take in. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you're just sitting there like, this is like the dopest, this is the most amazing thing ever, high fantasy, finally. But if you're not a Lord of the Rings fan, and like you're sitting down and you're trying to just like figure out what's going on, you're going to be absolutely lost, because it's not like, you know, every episode there's just scene chewing scenes essentially with actors and actresses where they're just going back and forth sparring politically with political jabs or behind the back intrigue or something along those lines. Now it's a slow burn here, bruh. Like, it's a, I put this plan in motion 300 years ago and like now it's coming to fruition type moves, where characters are discovering things of like what's going on, and then they're probably not going to explain exactly what the fuck that means for like 2 more episodes or like a completely other episodes. Of course there's like a bunch of like exposition and things along those lines, but for the most part I think the series is great. It offers something different from House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones is easy fantasy. It's action fantasy. You can jump right into it. You can understand what's going on really, really quick, and you can continue on from there. Rings of Power is high fantasy. Like, shit's gonna get deep. Sometimes you're just not even gonna explain things, and you're gonna have to like go and do your own research. Like, for me, like, I never read the prequel book. What's the prequel book called? It's called the Silmarillion. I never read that. I read let's see, I read Lord of the Rings when I was 12, 13. That was like 20 years ago. When I read all 3 of those books, because it was around the time when the movies were coming out. For The Hobbit, I went back and I read the Hobbit short story when the Hobbit was coming out. I didn't really have a reason to go and read like the Silmarillion, because it, for the most part, like, I operate in completely different theaters and I was never really interested in Lord of the Rings. This show is making me interested in all that backstory shit. So if you're somebody who loves the Lord of the Rings, this show is perfectly for you. And like, for the most part, I've just been sitting down going over like all the dope shit that's happened that I kind of wish they had shown on screen. We get like a small hint, like a small smidge of it, where they have like that very big montage where there's like a big ass war happening and there's like a dragon fighting a griffin. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because while that's going on, you have like a giant spider that's like the size of a mountain that's devouring gods, and then you have like a giant werewolf warg that's just running through like other elder gods, and then you have like that griffin is actually like the king of like all the griffins, who's fighting like the most dangerous dragon of like the age, and they're going head to head because the griffin's on the side of like the high humans, and then the dragon's on the side of Morgoth. Like, there's a whole lot of shit going on right there, and they skipped all that, and that's fine, because you'd be lost. Just be happy that you're getting the story that you're getting right here, and it's something to enjoy. Like, I fucking love it. But yeah, episode 1, 2, and 3, absolutely love it. Is it a slow burn at times? Absolutely. Is the acting really, really great? Yes. The complaints about, oh my god, a diverse cast, shut up. Like, you don't even understand the 3 different races of hobbits, but you're complaining about like black people in Middle Earth. if I could wrap an anchor around your foot and feed you to that fish thing that was chasing Galadriel in like episode 2, I absolutely would, but I can't. What are some of the other complaints that I heard? Like, for the most part, I feel as though that's it. It's like, ooh, feminism, Galadriel, and then it's like, ooh, diversity, blah, 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 and it's like, okay, like, you don't even understand. I'm high probability you didn't even sit down and read any of the books. You probably just watched the movies, but I mean, hey, here we are. I'm enjoying it. Like, it's a blast. It's something for me now to look forward to every single Friday, to sit down and wait for like the newest episode of Rings of Power, because it's only going to be getting better from here, because essentially we are working towards the second war. If it's not the second war, it's the third war. Basically, we're working towards the war where Isildur is going to slice off the ring from Sauron's hand, and then instead of throwing it into the fire, he keeps it for himself, which is going to lead down the line to the final war where Frodo finally destroys the One Ring by throwing it into Mount Doom. But we're building up essentially to that war. When Galadriel is like, you know, hey, I finally found an army, she has. Like, that's going to be the army that's going to be going into that fight. They've already introduced the king. So we've got Isildur, then they also introduced Isildur's father, and we've also gotten the current High King, and then we've gotten forgive me, I'm really horrible at the names. So we've got Elendil. Elendil is Isildur's father. He's essentially going to become friends with Gil-galad, who's the current High King of the Elves. We already encountered him. Who's related to Elrond, and of course Elrond is Arwen's father down the line. But both of them are essentially going to go off and fight that war, and Elrond and Isildur are going to end up inside of Mount Doom, but instead of Isildur throwing the ring into the fire, he's going to keep it for himself. I'm really hoping that the show decides to basically go with Isildur putting on the ring and disappearing, which is why Elrond couldn't kill him and throw the ring over into, because that was always like a small nitpick for me, which was like, if the ring is that dangerous and he refused to do it, I'd have just been like, yeet! But he chooses not to. So I'm sitting and I'm waiting. It's Friday night. Well, technically it's like Saturday morning now, but I'm essentially waiting for like next Friday for the next episode, because like it's dope shit. It's an alternative. It's a great alternative to Game of Thrones once you ignore all of the people fucking complaining about like feminism and diversity and all that fucking noise and bullshit. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. There's gonna be a bunch of videos that are basically gonna come up for the next, probably the next 3 days, where I'm gonna be talking about like the difference between the different hobbits, what's going on, why exactly we're seeing not Gil-galad, Elendil and Isildur, what exactly is going on there, like how exactly they're there, and why exactly they're living so long, basically like their whole genealogy, why Elrond looks the way in which he does. All that shit's going up on the channel. So if you're like, you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you're gonna have a blast for like the next 4 days with me talking about all this shit. But yeah, I will catch you in the next one. Peace.